All right, well, I want to say welcome to everyone joining us tonight. I'm really happy to be having this conversation with Sylvie Rosenthal. My name is Anna Campbell. I'm a member of the Art Lit Lab art board and also teach at the UW. In another moment, we would be doing this live and in person. I wouldn't necessarily need to tell you what the Art Lit Lab is, but we're coming from maybe many other places than would otherwise be the case. So I'll just say that ALL is a community-driven contemporary nonprofit arts organization supporting the visual, literary, music, and performing arts. We put on over 200 events a year. A lot of them have been in this format in 2020, mostly free and low cost year-round arts education for all ages, and working to make the arts more accessible and sustainable in our community. And I think one of the most fitting persons to have this conversation with then is Sylvie. So I want to maybe just say howdy and say that Sylvie's exhibit would have Slip, Spill, Fold, Changing Shapes of Meaning, open November 12th. The last day to see the work is tomorrow. So if you're in the Madison area, I would highly recommend encountering everything that we're going to talk about this evening in person. Sylvie is accomplished in all kinds of different fields, exhibited in museums and galleries across the country, is a regular fixture on the craft school circuit, the Penland, Haystack, Anderson Ranch, and beyond. Travels nationally and internationally as a visiting artist, including at San Diego State and internationally at the Australia National University and Tainan National University of the Arts in Taiwan. Very, very breaking news. Sylvie just won a $1,000 grant from Dane Arts as a finalist for the Women Arts Forward Fund, which is also kind of some exciting fresh press. Yeah, I just want to maybe turn things over briefly, Sylvie, to you, because I know we're in this kind of speaker switching imagery. So it seems strange to not reveal the curtain.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Sylvie. I am here in Madison, Wisconsin. And I want to thank everybody at the Art and Lit Lab, and especially Anna for doing this question and answer session. And to everybody at ALL who helped with get the show up and in the gallery. So yeah, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. So what we're thinking in terms of format is that Sylvie and I will go back and forth a bit. And at any point, if you want to pop some questions into the discussion chat section, please do that. Don't feel shy. Don't feel as if you have to wait to an appointed time. And then we'll sort of tag those as we go along, or we can do a kind of, question buffet at the end there, depending on how it's feeling. And yeah, maybe one of the ways to kind of get our feet wet and jump in here would be to just ask you about what we can unpack from this title, because I think there's a way that the title for this show works a lot like your art itself.
Yeah, when Jolynn asked me if I wanted to have an exhibition, I was thinking about the work that I had available to show, and also the time that we're in, right? Like, it's mostly, the brand new gallery has a great viewing from outside. So that felt like it was a really appropriate to show some of my recent work that feels like it's really changed. The meaning has changed and how that happens over time, but there's one specific piece that it just flipped very quickly, and how meanings change over time, and either they like there's a slippage, or it just sort of folds back on itself, or it spills out and extends to other things, and how meaning literally changes shape. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't have the old meaning, it's just been extended.
Mhm. Well, and what I like about that is so many of these meanings are just kind of flowing at the same time. And it's whether we have the capacity to have a long enough memory to know what's in play at all. So one of the pieces I've been thinking about recently is the cabinet, a bear cabinet, where the interior is made from mahogany, um, and that's a precious wood with its own history. The bear itself is pulling up all these different reference points, and I wonder if you can kind of talk us into that one as a kind of example of the meanings that we sort of are in some ways partial to, and then also are maybe in the process of discovering through the work.
Yeah, and so full disclosure, I have a slight obsession with bears, so that is one place that this started. And thinking about this particular stuffed bear was actually in my life for a while. A friend brought it from Florida, and it lived this life in my house and then in my studio. Originally, I was going to get it to make a snowsuit to shovel my driveway and sit on my couch in the winter, because that's what bears do. But then I decided I really wanted to make it a cabinet, and sort of change the proportions and stretch it and make it, because teddy bears have their own history, that's cute and problematic. And then bears and our understanding of bears have this whole other history. And that how I know a bear is mostly through mediation, right? Like I know it from images or from reading or from television. Like when I go to Colorado, I'm like, I want to see a bear. I don't want to see a bear. I want to see a bear. I don't want to see a bear. That there's a lot of push pull in that. And then thinking about the age of the Natural History Museum and the diorama and sort of the taming of nature and how we impose on it what we want. And then, so this, in its first iteration, it was installed much more like a diorama with this green indoor outdoor carpet behind it. And thinking of making it of use, of service, right, to humans, but sort of kneecapping that use, just having the like the staging of use.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it becomes a kind of Frankenstein monster of cabinet of curiosity sort of, mashup, where it's the cabinet and it's itself kind of playing both ends of that at the same time. It also, I feel like there's a lot going on, and this is, I think, part of your process in a really keen way, is that there's this sort of inside baseball, deep knowledge around what kind of wood is used for what sorts of purposes, whether that's industrial or hobbyist. And you brought up a term when we were speaking recently, forensic botany, which I really love. And I wonder if you could just maybe tag that for folks for a second, and kind of dig into why we see the woods that we see in different kinds of works.
Yeah, so I do have a big interest in forensic botany, and it's plant identification, but it's much more than that. It's like why things grow the way they do from certain places. And we have a great asset in Madison with the Forest Service Lab, which holds the largest species samples in the country. And so the mahogany is gesturing towards, right, the age of the Natural History Museum came at the tail end of mahogany's like symbolism for really high-end material. Mahogany comes from the Caribbean, and it has a problematic tie to the slave trade, because as the trees from the Caribbean were being taken down, and this was mostly done by slave crews, that the land was being cleared for sugar plantations. And the biomass was taken either to Europe or to New England furniture workshops. And it did two things, like the trees also served as great ballast when they didn't have other materials that they were moving. And so even by the 1800s, two of the three species of the small leaf mahogany that we identify as true mahogany were non-commercially viable and not allowed to be traded.
And that's, I mean, that's history that I think is not hidden to anyone, but is also just underneath the surface, and just underneath a sort of what maybe varnish of civility, or you know, a kind of decoration that that it's become possible to not recognize, or try to essentially pretend that what's happening isn't happening.
Mhm.
And so, you know, to go back then to think about the wildness of the bear and the threat of the bear, that, you know, the way that those two kinds of histories get joined together in this piece, I think is a really exciting one. How all kinds of histories become defanged, become tamed through objects, and then the way that a lot of your work operates is this kind of time capsule, or landmine that brings us back to the original sort of sources and components. I'm wondering too, we almost got into talking about the Sputnik Gem when you were talking about, you know, meanings can shift really on a dime, and that's really a major one of those. And the Sputnik Gem is a component piece in this broader still life, and I wonder if you could talk about maybe the logic of this still life, which is manifest, of course, in 3D. And the different things in that that are making up this composition, including, you know, this glowing gem.
The Sputnik Gem. So this piece was designed originally for the Villa Terrace Decorative Arts Museum, for one of the rooms in that building that is a historic room with a very orderly grid. And I was thinking I wanted to make a still life that sort of it relates to the house where the museum sits, but it also relates to the larger world. And the business that the people at the house started was in steel and transportation, and Milwaukee, being on the lake, is a big transportation hub. And I have, along with my forensic botany interest, I'm very curious about how biological material travels around the world, a lot of times as a stowaway, and or not intentionally. And so with this piece, I'm seeing the still life sort of as a timeline, and it goes from a very sort of European centric building and design to more industrial. And I'm using European as a stand-in for what people were looking to at that time. The house was built as an Italianate villa, so I'm riffing off of that. And then the second half of the table, as it moves across, is made out of trailer bed material, which is oak. The other part is Wisconsin native quarter sawn white oak. And the economies that are right in front of us that sort of play out in worldwide ways is very interesting to me. And thinking about how the still life with this overgrowth, using the tropes, there's a hand carved skull, there's, you know, symbolism of time and layers. And then this Sputnik gem, is at the far end of it, and I wanted it to seem like it had just landed. And this camel, I'm envisioning it, the table, somewhat like the Sahara, that it's like finding this thing that has landed, this spaceship. And the Sputnik gem itself is this, I'm using my Sputnik gem is modeled off of a decorative arts trend that was from the 60s, where making very small gems for necklaces or something that were modeled after Sputnik. And I'm modeling mine off of that. And very quickly, like as soon as I was thinking about my work and Jolynn asked me to have the show, and I was like, oh my God, this thing, like, can I show it anymore? Or can I not show it? Can I show this object or can I not show it? Because it within 2 years of its making, became something that it cannot unbecome, which is a COVID particle, you know. And but when we were talking yesterday, and the direct translation of Sputnik is fellow traveler, and that is, you know, unfortunately close to what COVID is and does, and how it moves. You know, while one is is a satellite, I was thinking about communication and global communication, and how communication exists in so many formats. But unfortunately, a virus like going through communities is also a form of communication and transfer.
Yeah, in the literal communicability, like and much of the same, you know, profound resources that were put towards getting Sputnik out there now, in terms of, you know, mass efforts to get these particular fellow travelers to stay put as much as possible. It's a really beautiful collection of different objects, and of course, you know, the major still life move often is the memento mori, and so, you know, yes, you have the skull, and now it in fact it turns out that there's yet another sign, sadly, that's about our own fragility, vulnerability, yeah, as well. But there's also that fantastic stopwatch there, so another kind of marker of time, and in particular, it's one of the pieces that you've marbled, and that's a gesture that I think is another great example of a kind of material metaphor of a inside baseball surface treatment that gives us all these cues. And maybe could you give us a sense of what that process, what you're using that to make happen for our audience?
Yeah, I'm using the marbleizing for a number of different ways. When I marbleize objects, right, and currently I'm trying to make things look geologic rather than the end of a book, and to think about time in terms of the mineral times and how many different time stamps there are on things. Like we run on human time, trees run on tree time, and that these mineral, you know, like that marble takes time to build, and time and pressure. And the stopwatch sort of speaks to, you know, the many ways that time can be counted or recorded or held. And with the marbleizing started because it's also a decorative arts trope as well in the house, that the show was in originally, or the piece was in originally, had a lot of marbleizing in it. And I like the shallow depth of it, that you can see two things through it. And the act of marbleizing itself was a technical challenge to myself, because you're really dealing with these physical forces. Like at one point I was like, I think I'm dealing with the mathematics of turbulence, like how you dip something and displace is the shape of your container. How does that affect flow? And while I'm using non-pure mineral pigments, everything has a weight. So even though that's not true lapis, it still has a weight, and you're pushing and pulling things to be able to get the density that you want. And then basically you're wrapping the flat surface of like the still water around a mind-boggling shape, and how it stretches, and how that's something that like no other material can do, is super fascinating to me.
Well, and then you end up with this wild, oversized, kind of 70s era design of a stopwatch. So it's already kind of dated in this one particular way that can maybe feel a little bit comical. And then on top of it, we get this geologic time riff, or also the decorative arts doing geologic time. So it's like the surface might be a really thin treatment in terms of the pigment, but in terms of the references, it's just, it's like you can just keep going down and down and down.
Yeah, and then with a stopwatch, it's like what you're doing when you are dipping is you are freezing that moment in time, right? Like it just like doubles over on itself like so much. And that particular act of marbleizing is like super graphic.
So we're getting the full slip, spill, fold in one object. We've got a intrepid first question popping in, and that's, can you explain more about the process that goes into marbleizing? And yeah, I knew that you talked about there's a dipping and a pigment thing, but this is like a very specialized deal. Can you, and because the other thing is, nobody is supposed to ever marbleize anything as big as the stopwatch, right? I mean, it's the scale of it is ridiculous. So that,
yeah. And I've done some bigger things, and it's all it's so I'm not sure if you should, so marbleizing is a word and marbled is a word. I'm not sure which tense I should be going for here, so apologies. What you do is you have a bath, and you basically you have a bath of I use water-based paint. So I use a seaweed mixture. It's a non-toxic seaweed mixture that is not, that you need to fill. You have to figure out what volume, because you need to displace the object for full wrapping, and it can't touch the bottom. So you need to think about the surface area, because it's really the surface area that you're wrapping, right? You're pulling the paint, and the paint will spread. You have to do but the paint will spread on the surface area, and you can move it around. But even in my research of marbleizing is one of those like mystic, like crafts. Like that it's not there. It was fairly secretive in guild work, and there's marbleizing that comes like Turkish marbleizing, like there's so many different kinds of marbleizing. And historically it was done with oil-based paints, but getting certain colors to float, like reds are heavy, golds are heavy, blues are heavy, so but basically you like, if you were doing a piece of paper, you could have a small bath, and you're just taking what's on the surface and picking it up. And you could do it to fabric, you could do it to wood, you could do it to a number of things.
And then one of the challenges with the wood must be that wood floats, right? So you're like wrestling this thing as you're...
Wood floats, but you also, things happen to wood when you dip it in water. So it's an extremely long process because the fibers stick up when you marbleize wood, or when you get wood wet. It's part of your finish process, and sanding and wetting it, it's called raising the grain. So there's this whole process to get it. Yeah, it's been a great science experiment, but for that stopwatch, it was probably 13 gallons of medium that I needed. Yeah, and it only lasts for 3 days.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like terrifying levels of process and how to make how to make things as absolutely complicated as humanly possible in order to generate an effect.
Right? But there's something about like freezing that one moment in time that's like that I think it's like frozen action, or I'm like, where would it go next? Where was it before? It's like looking at a cloud, and then picking a moment.
Oh, well, I wonder maybe after kind of hearing the sort of complex process around this really specific labor intensive thing, we could tag the opposite end of what you do, which is material metaphor that is drawn entirely from um, appropriated found objects, and that shows up in a range of different pieces. There's that great um, aquarium plants and Hulk cookie jar that tops the VCR experiment drafting. It happens, as you said, with the trailer bed floor. It happens in that long panel from the side of a semi itself. There's a whole, and I'm just kind of tagging a few of them, but I wonder if there's one of those that you might want to dig in and talk us through and help kind of see, what the found object gives in the material metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, I could start with the Hulk because it's sort of the most I don't know. It's so the Hulk cookie jar is I became pretty interested in the Hulk just because of what it does. It sort of phase changes, right? Like he's two things or two people, and this Hulk cookie jar, just the scaling of it, like his head is shrunk and it's all muscle. And then it's also a cookie jar, but shouldn't the cookie jar be the other guy? Like Hulk does not demonstrate cookie worthy behavior. And then that it's like all just this shiny, hollow object, and the aquarium plants are, yeah, just sort of like turn the volume up on that a bit, like the plasticity of them, and they're on top of this stack of hand carved VCRs. And for me, the VCR was the first time I could like sort of own an image or have control over it, where you could pause, rewind, record. And it was how you learned a lot of things. And that and I definitely question the truth value of a lot of it, but it was a um, novel pretty novel thing. And thinking about the Hulk, who's the Incredible Hulk in terms of non-believable, that like that sort of overlays all of it, that they're these somewhat artifact, somewhat like a timeline of the VCR and the buttons of control, and then this like hollow pre-made form. But the Hulk is just such a strange creature.
Well, as other folks have described the work, it's a super complicated constellation of things rolling in together all at once. And there's something about that piece where it could have a sort of hipster twee character to it, but there's something about putting them all in at once that there's it fixes us again in a certain sort of time period, that like that analog moment that was the VCR moment, that also, you know, speaks to a certain kind of like developmental moment for, say, childhood, you know, the superhero moment, the cookie moment.
Mm-hmm.
and and all of that, I think the way that it works together for me ends up um, losing any kind of ironic potential, and it just has this much more sincere quality to it. But there's a lot of mixed signals going on. I mean, nothing to me is more hysterical, honestly, than the idea of the Hulk as a sort of empty vessel. It's a very
Right.
like feminine uh,
Right. And it's like
construction.
thin slip cast. Like it's this, um, yeah, that,
Well, maybe this is actually a great question, because I wanted to ask you about the way maybe things like superheroes or teddy bears or animals generally, um, people can be really dismissive. It's a sort of key quality of a particular Western perspective, is just that, you know, like
mhm.
animal stuff is kid stuff, is, you know, and so thinking about how one might um, be overly dismissive in some of this work that has this playful quality to it. So the question is, I'm wondering about the nature of playfulness in your work. Can you expand on how or whether humor feels like an important component slash balance for these labor intensive processes and deeply referential work?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like my work has always been playful, sort of because it refused to sit still in a lot of ways. Like I'm trained as a furniture maker and I can make furniture very well, but I prefer to make different different objects, and that there's this like desire to do that. And i like I like humor because I think it's an entryway, and I think that you can learn, it can draw someone in. um but I think it's always been, that's not true. I think some of my work has been like fairly serious, or my, you know, like 10 or 15 years ago, it was less humorous. But I think that it's like learning for me as an artist, it's like learning and unlearning and like trusting myself that I'm like, you know, I like things that make me chuckle, you know, like, you know, like the one liner that's always funny, you know, like that. I'm not so interested in things being whimsical. I'm interested in humor that like will break your heart the way a good karaoke singer will, you know, that it's like, it's funny because it's sad, because it's true, like the trifecta statement that can be reversed any sort of a way, you know, like and without making judgment on it, like the tape dispenser, um which I'm like anthropomorphizing. It's sort of looking at this framed print by Sam Gross that's a New Yorker cartoon that says, I don't care if she's a tape dispenser, I love her. You know, that you're like, it's just so sweet and tender and like generous. And I wanted but then there's like a bit of like melancholy in it, that this other tape dispenser is alone and doesn't like find, you know, it needs to find a snail or it needs another tape, you know, but it's more like, oh, like you can love something. It's like giving yourself this, allowing yourself to like fall for it or to like laugh at something. Like, I think um, that there's a serious humor and there's like a chuckle humor, and it's all in there. I would say the Hulk piece is probably or maybe the framed prints are sort of like the funniest. But I think that humor is a way for people to have an expansive view of some of the stuff that's really not funny. You know, like the piece that you mentioned with the trailer side. There's like maybe it's like 4 foot wide, 9 foot tall section of a semi side that thinking about transportation and, you know, I've Stoughton truck bed from the Still Life as Oasis piece and thinking about how things move around. And here now it's by semi, and that these enclosures, like we don't know what's being brought. It could be canned peaches, and it could be, you know, things that we don't want on our roads. And the print behind it is an original Forbes magazine halftone print of a bomb casing that was made in Milwaukee by a company that made a staggering amount of the bomb casings in World War II. But this is like everybody, all businesses had to make stuff for the war. Like AC Gilbert had to make stuff for the war, toy maker, you know, so it's, you know, like they're so problematic that it's hard to judge, you know, or at least it is for me that, you know, the world is a complicated place, you know, but we can see like beauty and humor and sadness in it.
Well, I think that that ethic of material and method of construction um, is a really interesting one to track through the work, right? I mean, we started um, talking with the mahogany in the bear, and then the bear is also one of these mass made, um, maybe in sweatshop conditions, you know, gigantic bear, um, and then of course your own labor conditions are ones that you set for yourself, but uh, are ones that have had to adapt to an economy that does its best to really crush artists and independent furniture makers and people working, you know, precisely in the way that you've been trained and set up to work. And I think that there's something um, just so exciting and compelling in thinking about how um, manufacturing process gets roped in. And I wonder, because I'm trying to track some ways that your training as a furniture maker shows up. And in some cases, you know, the construction of the table, the construction of the cabinet, the carving, you know, it shows up that way, but I think it shows up also in terms of where your eye is trained to look.
Mhm.
And yeah, so maybe that's a setup to just say, like, how does um, that long history in terms of function and that aspect of your training as a furniture maker show up in your work now?
Well, depends on what kind of work. Like the work in this show, you know, I have a table and, you know, things that aren't quite what one would think of as functional furniture, but they're definitely built. Like the process is very important. Like in Still Life as Oasis, the one um sawhorse is based off of an like Italian design from the 1800s, you know, and it's built fairly similar to a method then, while the other half of the table was built like way post, you know, with parts that would mimic like post industrialization, like they're legs that you get at Home Depot that I slightly altered, but the way it's put together is just with a Craig jig to show like the speed of um different kind, you know, speed and technique and intention. And I think that I do believe that all those things play into um the wholeness of the work. Um like the cabinet making on the bear is very precise, but it's not perfect. Like there are parts of repair in it. And that's something I think repair is really important and is in our it is an act of not over consumption and not getting rid of something too soon and repairing it. And I think it's also a skill. A lot of things aren't repaired because there isn't time or know-how to repair it. I'm not sure I'm answering the question though.
Yeah, no, I think that that ethic of repair is it's a really critical and beautiful one. And I mean, the reason why people, for the most part, don't have skills to repair is that we've been um, trained to consume and not trained to repair, and so it's I don't know. The other side of planned obsolescence is like planned incompetence in terms of
Right?
do I fix my table when it's busted. Um, yeah. Well, and maybe that's a great kind of tag because I feel like there's, these different avenues in your practice that have to do with commission work, with exhibition, but you've also been, at this point, teaching little kids how to build circuits and use hatchets, correct?
Mhm.
This kind of maybe is a good.
Yeah. So I've been teaching kids my whole life, and adults for a while, but I the field that I'm in is problematically white and problematically male. And I do believe that the thing that I can do to help diversify it is to start kids young. You don't know it's a thing you like or a thing you can do if you're never exposed to it. So um, I also think that with everybody's on computers way more, like that manual dexterity is taking a nosedive. And I think that it's something tool use and is empowering. So I have a little pod of kids who were coming over. We've as Wisconsin has gotten awful with COVID, we closed it down, so we're waiting to start it back up. But letting kids, we're doing Sloyd, sort of a Sloyd based class, which is like Scandinavian peasant craft, so knife work. And letting them chop wood, learn how to use a hatchet. I set up a little sander to make pointy sticks because that's always fun. And yeah, and then I started my studio, my business name is Lower Astronomy Studios, and I started Lower Astronomy Projects, which are hands-on manual dexterity and creativity kits. So it's a combination of um, having kids use their hands and take risks and mitigated risks and build things. But I make the parts, I make the kit, and then I do an instructional video so I can connect things to the world a little bit more. And there's also just like in my work, there's like subtle lessons and bigger, like I have sort of embedded intentions within it because these kids are the future and they're going to defend us from the vampires, zombies. And they better know how to use knives in their hands, make pointy sticks. So, yeah, so today, like this month, made a hedgehog pencil holder with a trailer because I really like animals and then I get to go down the rabbit hole researching them. And I wanted to make a pencil holder. So it's a pencil holder because it's spiky, but it has a trailer so you can store the rest of your pencils if the spikes are too much. But so it's hammering, it's a line, talking about parallel, perpendicular, how wheels move, how your force moves, how to take nails out if you get it wrong, how to glue things. And one of the things that is totally the opposite of school about these projects is you can't really do them wrong. Like you can make it a polka dot hedgehog or you can make it not like a hedgehog. Doesn't matter. Like you can make your trailer a pencil trailer or you can make it to tow other things, and that there's really no wrong answer, and you can follow the directions, or make really whatever you want to make, because the making and getting lost in that is the important part. But it's full of little sanding, rubber band play, holding a nail, angling it, so it's been really fun.
Well, my nieces have been putting these kits together, and it's been a total trip because the older one is the perfectionist who usually can do everything and is the sort of very bookworm kind of kid, and the younger one is the daredevil. And so there's this really great kind of equalizing moment where the niece dynamic has been thrown asunder through the hedgehogs, and yeah, who's got the kind of hand skills that are worked out. um well, and then, I mean, that's like you said, this is something you've been doing for a while. I love to those gigantic charm bracelets where
Mhm.
kids have collaborated to kind of make these massive um, oversize collections of things that signify what's important to them. And I think it's just it's a really another exciting kind of element of the ethic of what you do. um it looks like we're creeping towards maybe the end of the conversation. I know I want to have at least one more question I want to ask Sylvie, but um, if you've been holding on nervously, waiting to hit return for your question, this is the moment to launch it. Um, and uh, I want to tag one more phrase that has come up a lot in our conversation, and that's this phrase intersecting flight patterns, which I think might be a really great uh, summarizing sort of term to help folks maybe put together some of the range of things that we've heard you talk about.
Yeah, I like to think of a lot of the pieces as intersecting flight patterns where many points converge and meet, but then continue, where you get enough information and it makes sense, and more information can actually make something make less sense, and that you put all the things, but if you remove it, you might be able to make certain connections. Like all of the works have likenesses, similarities and dissimilarities, and that they connect for a moment, and that it's not about making like some solid attachment or solid judgment on anything, that it's I think it's more of a curiosity of exploring those things and asking people to question, like how they got how do you know what you know, like what does this, like what attaches in your head when you see this, that, or the other. um and I think that with my work, that's one of the harder, I don't want the information like wall text to be too didactic. Like for the still life as oasis, there's a key, a drawn key to sort of explain it, but for kids they could color it in, so it sort of serves, it's very one size fits all. And I like that, and I've been trying to figure out how to like get being able to use the term intersecting flight patterns and have people um understand, and that like, why is it intersecting flight patterns versus roadways? And I like the intersecting flight patterns. You can sort of like, oh wait, the contrails are still there, like that it's not a hard and fast thing, that it's something that happens momentarily and you'll never really get back to that one point, right? Because there's always more.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the comments that came through is respect the measured intentionality in every part of Sylvie's practice, even in pointy sticks. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'm right there on the sort of respect flight pattern, because um, what you're describing and how you work and how the work manifests in terms of physical forms really is this way where someone who's approaching it just as a sort of new human being in the world who hasn't been around long is going to get what's going on in terms of color, scale, reference points that are happening. And then, scholars of the Anthropocene are going to get all of those same things, but in a way that kind of shoots back a couple centuries further.
Yeah.
But that kind of multimodal accessibility is a really, I think, generous part of your practice that is always, so great to be able to appreciate.
Well, thank you.
And let's do this one last one. It's are the stools another in the teapot series?
I think they're talking about the teapot that's under the still life.
Yeah, this is a deep cuts question.
Yeah, deep cuts. So yes, that piece is from, that teapot is from over 10 years ago. And I used to take part in a lot of teapot shows. The skull on the top of the table is also a teapot. None of my teapots are functional. But the teapot, I think that this plays well into what we're talking about, because it's a bunch of stools that are piled up with, with a form to look like a handle and a spout and a top, but it's neither a teapot nor an actual stool, though those stools, you can stand on them. But they're miniature. And I made one once that was a pile of miniature table and pile of stools that was an elephant that was a teapot. That it was like all these things that you could see all these things in it, but it was actually none of them. If you're talking about like functionality, that like we can put these things together to make things, and like it's all of that and none of that, that there's something really magical about vision and the way your brain puts things together, that you can unsee the stools to make a teapot, or are you seeing the form, or can you take it apart and not see it as this? It's like when you're looking really close at a painting in a gallery or wherever a painting is, and you're like, those are just brush strokes. And then you see an object and you're like, oh my God, it's a thing. Wait, just brush strokes. It's a thing, like how our eyes and brains deal with things.
Well, and so much of it, of everything that you're doing is this kind of like big gestalt move where go in close and it's perfect precision, back up, it's a commentary on, the sort of last gasp of the Industrial Revolution, and how the sort of decorative arts movement has responded to that, and what 2 generations, 3 generations past, what is our legacy on an ever depleting planet. I mean, it's like, I feel like you absolutely do that, but the representation is a lot more than like looks like that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read out our last question. It's, how do you think about design in your overall creative practice? This is a nice kind of like.
What do I think about design? Yeah, that's a great question. I think design, it depends on the prompt, what the design is. And design for my speculative work, like the sculpture, can generally take a long time. Some moves are very simple and fast, and other ones I find that when it tends to get like way too belabored, it might border on contrived. How do I think about design? It just like, it really depends on what I'm going for, because I design like designing the kids' kits are very different than designing the whale that I'm building in my studio right now, and I think that I think that one needs to employ all kinds of thinking, like conceptual thinking, critical thinking, and design thinking. And one of the things I appreciate most about design thinking is the deconstruction of the prompt, right? A lot of other kinds of thinking don't interrogate you to take apart your prompt as to what the function might be, and why that is. And so it depends. There's so many different parts to what I might design in my studio for Anna, can you pick an object? I don't know. I can't get specific enough just because of like, it has to do with time, it has to do with money, it has to do with, end point.
Yeah, well, I'm just, here's a sort of bananas one, but like, I had the deep pleasure of being able to share some studio space with you when campus was on lockdown, and I, came to join you in the shop for a couple months there, and I would just say it's in every gesture everywhere. It's in like how you set up your work lamps. It's in like the holsters for the drills. It's in this giant bubble wrap roll that's like hanging with a perfect. It's just like so precious. The way that it's just kind of like perfectly balanced on this bracket on the wall, but totally out of reach so it doesn't get in the way. I mean, I feel like there's a super traditional sense of order and logic that is a key part of design. That's not about like how's it look, but it's about like order of operations kind of move.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of order of operations things, and then there's like the good design is stuff you don't see, right? Like your table legs never stick out past, the top, so you don't trip over them, because that's how your body works. Like you wouldn't, like the thing you stub your toe on, look at it, like the top, the leg is proud of the top, and that's why your eye clears, and that's why, and I think I learned a lot, some of those things I learned from doing construction, right? Like your cadence, how you move around a space, and all of those things.
But then I think it's like it's a sort of very cradle to grave kind of thing too, because part of your creative practice is all the offcuts get brought into fire pit that becomes like the center for community conversation building, and I think that's also
Yeah. And thinking about the studio as a place to like what I can do with my studio. And, now is not the time, but I want to, the Sloyd classes have been so much fun that I want to do more of those, like teach more kids and get more kids, like have a mentorship program in my studio, because so many, that's how, I learned a lot about, I worked in a shop when I was a kid, and you learn a lot, and it's I think that all of those things are important, and how my studio can, how I want it to operate in the community where my studio puts its money, and things like that. I try to be pretty intentional with how it works. So it is, yeah, it's a whole system as opposed to just something that like just spits out work.
Well, I think that's maybe a perfect, really beautiful place to land on. And again, Sylvie's show is open tomorrow, Saturday, the 19th. So if you haven't yet had a chance to either press your face up against the glass or the windows, or actually get in there and see this beautiful work in person, I can't recommend it more highly. So thanks all for joining us. Sylvie, always such a total pleasure to chat about the work.
Thank you. And thank you to you, Anna. This was so lovely.
Excellent.